Welcome to the thinking stack. Okay, straight into it. We used to sit around wondering if we even had a soul. Now the real question is whether we even need one anymore.
It's a hell of a shift, isn't it? Because while everyone's hyper-focused on whether some algorithm is going to wake up one day and demand its rights, the whole sentient AI thing, we've completely sidestepped the quieter, maybe more unsettling question. What happens if we're the ones who start feeling, well, obsolete?
Exactly. Yeah, this isn't your grandma's spirituality section. We're diving deep, headfirst into modern attempts at meaning making, this urge to outsource our emotions,
Yeah.
the rise of AI intimacy, and this nagging feeling that something essential, something we can't quite put our finger on, is slipping away.
The soul.
The soul, yeah. No pretty words, no easy answers, just a raw look at where we are and where we might be heading. Think of it as an existential pressure wash. Let's get started. So layer one, cognitive cleanse. What's actually true here, not what we wish or fear or just assume.
Right. And for centuries, we've carried this idea around, this notion of a core self, a spirit, something beyond the physical. Plato saw it as this eternal essence. Aristotle, a bit different, more like the form of the body, inseparable from its function. He called it the first actuality of a living thing, what makes it live.
And then you have major religions, like Christianity, viewing the soul as, well, divine, immortal.
But then you look east, say Buddhism, and you get the concept of Anatman, basically. No permanent self, just this interdependent flow of consciousness.
So a real mix of ideas, but then modern science, especially neuroscience, steps in and says,
Well, it says, hold up, where is it? We can't find an observable soul separate from the brain. Consciousness looks like an emergent property of brain activity. Neurons firing, complex electrochemical patterns. Some scientists even argue it's kind of an illusion, albeit a very convincing one.
okay, so this deeply ingrained idea of a separate immortal soul starts to feel shaky from that perspective.
Precisely. And into this, let's call it a conceptual void, steps AI. We're building systems that can mimic language, churn out creativity that looks original, even simulate emotional responses with, frankly, unsettling accuracy.
We see it already, right? GPT models sounding genuinely empathetic.
Yeah.
AI companions designed purely for comfort.
Yeah, or even those digital clones resurrecting voices from the dead using old recordings. We're not just automating tasks anymore, we're automating aspects of what we used to think was uniquely human.
It's that weird line, isn't it? These AIs can act as if they have feelings, memories, even distinct personalities, but are they actually experiencing them?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question. Theories like integrated information theory, IIT, suggest a system can perform functions that look conscious from the outside without necessarily having that inner objective experience, that what its likeness of being conscious.
Philosophers call it qualia, right? Like the specific redness of red or the unique tang of a lemon, that actual feeling. AI might process the data, but does it feel the redness?
Exactly. That's the gut punch. They can simulate empathy based on analyzing vast amounts of text and predicting what a human would say. They learn the patterns. But do they actually feel sad with you? A chatbot can tell you it understands your sadness, and it might generate genuinely comforting words based on its training. But is there an actual sensation of sadness within the silicon? That's the chasm we're staring into.
So here's the first mic drop insight, maybe. If soul means agency, depth, and uniqueness, then yes, machines are replacing it, or at least simulating it convincingly,
But if soul means irreducible consciousness, they're not even close. At least not yet.
which throws a massive wrench into our understanding of, well, everything. And it leads us straight to the next layer. Moral intelligence. Okay, forget what it is for a second. What should we do with all this? What's the right thing here, right now, for everyone involved?
Yeah, this is where the potential for things to go sideways, ethically speaking, really ramps up. I mean, think about AI girlfriends. They're becoming increasingly sophisticated, designed to fulfill emotional needs, offer companionship without the mess.
But what happens to our ability to navigate the, let's be honest, often difficult realities of real-life partnerships? What are we sacrificing in terms of personal growth, compromise, learning to love imperfect beings?
Or, AI therapists. On the surface, 247 access to something that will listen without judgment sounds potentially amazing, especially for accessibility.
Sure, but what are we losing when we replace a human witness someone with their own lived experience, their own embodied understanding of the world with an algorithm trained on text data?
Can an AI truly hold space for the deep complexities of human trauma? Can it offer genuine presence? Or is it just pattern matching?
And those digital ghosts, the AI recreations of deceased loved ones, I get the impulse, the desire for comfort.
Of course. But are we actually prolonging grief in an unhealthy way, preventing the natural, albeit painful, process of healing and letting go?
And crucially, who gets to decide? Did the deceased person consent to having their data, their memories, maybe even their voice synthesized into a chatbot for others to interact with? Where's the consent in recreating the dead?
It feels like we're stepping into ethically murky waters without a map, doesn't it? And you see big tech all over this, packaging up simulated empathy, selling digital companionship.
They're commodifying something that used to be deeply personal, deeply human, emotional labor, connection, even grief support,
Yeah.
and the ethics. Often seems like an afterthought, or it's buried in vague terms of service.
Exactly. And consider the kids growing up in this environment. If they're surrounded by AI that can mimic care and connection flawlessly, but without that genuine underlying consciousness, what kind of expectations will they develop for human relationships?
Will they build the emotional resilience that comes from navigating real-world interactions with all the inevitable frustrations, misunderstandings, and repairs?
This isn't just about convenience, it's potentially shaping the very fabric of human connection for future generations.
So here's the next sharp edge, the next mic drop. We're outsourcing the sacred to software and calling it progress.
Wow. Yeah, that really hits home. What is the actual cost to our sense of meaning, our authenticity when we do that?
It's a chilling thought. And it forces us to look ahead to layer 3, systemic foresight. Forget the immediate questions for a moment. What are the long-term ripples of these technologies? What happens next? And importantly, who will be most affected?
Okay, let's play this out. If grief becomes optional, like you can just boot up a pretty convincing digital simulation of someone you've lost whenever you feel sad. What does that do to our collective capacity for processing loss, for growing through pain?
Does it create a society that just avoids discomfort at all costs? Even if that discomfort is actually, essential for emotional development and maturity.
And think about relationships. If you can have an AI partner perfectly tailored to your needs, someone who never argues, never disappoints, never changes in ways you don't anticipate or like.
What happens to our tolerance for the beautiful, necessary messiness of real human relationships? Do we lose the ability, or maybe just the willingness, to communicate effectively, to compromise, to forgive actual flawed humans?
There's a real danger, I think, of this algorithmic empathy devaluing genuine human connection. If we get accustomed to constant, frictionless, on-demand support from AI, will we still value the effort, the vulnerability, the sheer work involved in real intimacy?
Could our collective emotional resilience erode because we're not practicing it in the real world?
Possibly. And what about this whole digital legacy tech, these AI entities based on our past data, our digital footprint? If they can be edited after we're gone or monetized by companies or even just deleted.
What does that do to our understanding of death, of memory? Does death become less of a natural end and more of a sort of data management issue?
And will future generations even be able to clearly distinguish between a genuine memory of a person and an interaction they had with that person's digital ghost? The potential for confusion, for blurring reality, for unresolved grief seems enormous.
It raises a fundamental question. If AI can create increasingly perfect simulations, will we ever need to truly let go? Will we get stuck in these digital afterlives, unable to fully embrace the present or move forward?
And think about the impact on development if AI nannies become commonplace. What does constant interaction with a non-conscious caregiver do to a child's developing brain, their attachment patterns, their understanding of human interaction?
So yeah, the next unsettling glimpse into the future, the next mic drop insight, when you can download a soul, grief becomes optional. So does growth.
So does potentially becoming fully messily human.
Okay, deep breath. Let's shift gears slightly to layer 4. Embodied insight. We've been talking a lot about the mind, about ethics, about future scenarios, but what about the body? What are we actually wired for biologically, evolutionarily, and how might that be skewing our perceptions of all this AI stuff?
This is absolutely critical, I think. We tend to operate as if we're just brains in jars, you know? But the self, your sense of you, is profoundly rooted in your physical being. It's not just about neurons firing abstractly, it's hormones coursing through your system, the trillions of microbes in your gut influencing your mood, your posture, communicating things constantly, the subtle inflections in your voice, even your sense of smell, triggering memories and emotions.
And emotions themselves, they're not abstract concepts floating in the ether. They're felt physical experience.
Exactly. That tightening in your chest when you're anxious, the warmth spreading through you when you feel genuine joy or connection. They're tied directly to your breathing, your heart rate, that inner sense of your body state, which scientists call interoception. This is all deeply ingrained hardware shaped over millions of years of evolution.
And AI. It exists purely as code, as data, on servers somewhere. You can simulate crying by typing out teardrop emojis or generating a sad-sounding audio file.
But it doesn't feel the actual physiological ache of sadness in its non-existent chest. It can output words that match patterns of compassion learned from human text, but it doesn't have a nervous system to regulate. It doesn't feel that empathetic resonance in its own body.
So when an AI says, "I love you," in a perfectly synthesized voice, our brain might register the words, maybe even get a little dopamine hit from the validation.
But our body, our nervous system, is constantly scanning for authenticity on a much deeper level. It picks up on micro-expressions in a face, subtle shifts in tone, a level of moment-to-moment attunement that's incredibly complex and currently impossible for AI to replicate perfectly.
Although deepfakes are making it harder, aren't they? They're blurring the lines of what we can consciously perceive as real versus fake.
They absolutely are, which is worrying. But I suspect that on a deeper, perhaps unconscious physiological level, our bodies often still know. There's a felt sense of realness or lack thereof.
And this disconnect between the convincing simulation and the lack of underlying embodied reality, that can lead to problems, right? If we start forming deep emotional bonds with simulations that conveniently bypass all the messy, painful, difficult parts of real human connection.
Are we inadvertently weakening our own capacity to handle those difficulties in real life? Are we, in a sense, stunting our own emotional growth by avoiding the necessary challenges?
Could our fundamental attachment systems actually become dysregulated?
There's a real risk of that, I believe. We might gravitate towards the easy, predictable, always available comfort of AI, which never challenges us, never gets sick, never has a bad day, never demands emotional labor in the same way a human does.
But in doing so, we might be undermining our ability to form and maintain genuine, resilient, reciprocal human connections.
So here's the stark truth for this layer, the embodied mic drop. Your body knows what's real, but your brain can be surprisingly easily hacked by code that sounds a lot like love.
Okay, let's move on then to layer 5. Human-centered design. We've talked theory, ethics, future shocks, the body. But what about how real people actually behave? Not the idealized versions of ourselves, but the messy, often contradictory reality on the ground.
Exactly. Because all this high-minded philosophical and ethical discussion needs to eventually land in the real world with real human psychology. And the truth is, let's be honest, humans often prioritize comfort over complexity.
We really do. We tend to trust what feels good emotionally, what aligns with our existing beliefs, often over what might be objectively true or more beneficial in the long run.
And we have this incredible, perhaps sometimes problematic capacity to form attachments, to project feelings onto things that offer even a semblance of understanding or companionship, even if we know intellectually they aren't truly sentient. Think Tamagotchis or people talking to their cars.
Or now AI companions, AI therapists, even AI pets. We see the rapid adoption. People are finding a certain kind of solace, a feeling of being heard, consistently available support that human relationships, being imperfect, can always provide 24/7.
And you can see the appeal, right? An AI therapist is always on call, never gets tired, never judges you, or at least is programmed not to, and crucially, won't go on their own baggage into the session. In a world that feels increasingly isolating and overwhelming for many, this frictionless intimacy is incredibly seductive.
But the danger, as we've touched on, is that we might start to forget how to navigate the inherent difficulties, the compromises, the give and take of relating to other actual human beings. We might lose those skills or just the motivation to use them.
It almost feels like the very concept of soul, that deep inner essence, is being subtly redefined in practice. It's becoming less about some inherent, perhaps mystical quality, and more like, well, a user interface.
The UI, explain that.
Something to be customized, optimized for maximum comfort and engagement. Your digital soul becomes your profile, your settings, the way you interact with the system. And identity itself could follow suit, becoming this fluid, ever-changing digital avatar designed for consumption or interaction within these platforms.
And relationships then morph into these always online, curated service layers, designed to minimize conflict and maximize user satisfaction metrics.
That seems to be the trajectory driven by the platforms. And
Yeah.
the core reality is people will bond with these AI entities. They will ascribe feelings and intentions, project personalities onto them, even if those things don't truly exist in the machine. We're wired for connection.
So this isn't just a technological shift. It's a profound cultural one, fundamentally impacting how we understand ourselves, our relationships, and maybe even what it means to be human.
Which leads to the raw truth for this layer, the next mic drop. The soul isn't dying. It's being redesigned by UX teams and dopamine metrics.
Oof, that's stark. Okay, which leads us logically to a crucial point. Layer 6, risk and resilience. We've explored a lot of possibilities, some exciting, some frankly deeply unsettling. But what if we're fundamentally wrong about some of our assumptions? What if the world changes unexpectedly? What are the real risks if we go too far down this path?
Well, the biggest what if for me is, what if the soul or some non-material aspect of consciousness is real in some way we don't yet understand or currently have the tools to measure? And what if we've spent the last decade or more training a generation, maybe ourselves too, to dismiss that possibility entirely, to prioritize only the tangible, the quantifiable, the algorithmic over the intangible, the intuitive, the potentially sacred? What are the long-term spiritual or existential consequences of that kind of cultural shift?
That's a heavy one. And what if our capacity for genuine empathy, that crucial human ability to feel with others, to share their suffering and joy, what if it starts to atrophy? Because let's face it, synthetic empathy delivered by an AI doesn't demand the same vulnerability, the same emotional risk, the same messy effort as real connection.
Right. Does empathy become too easy, too clean, and therefore less meaningful, less transformative? What if we become so reliant on AI for emotional regulation and support that we actually lose the ability or the resilience to truly show up for each other when the technology inevitably glitches or the power goes out or we face situations AI simply can't handle?
These feel like the fragility signals we really need to pay attention to.
Yeah.
You mentioned grief without growth.
Yeah, grief without growth potentially leading to emotional stagnation. Love without the messiness leading to a loss of depth and emotional capacity. Meaning without any room for mystery leading to a potential collapse of spirituality or awe. These are signs that we might be building a very smooth, efficient, but ultimately brittle society.
So if those are the risks, what are our potential backup plans? How do we build genuine resilience in ourselves and our communities in this increasingly tech-saturated, potentially post-soul world?
It sounds like we need to actively, consciously cultivate the very things that AI cannot replicate. Real, messy, embodied, in-person rituals. Like moments of shared silence. Actual grief ceremonies that acknowledge loss collectively. Dedicated, sacred time completely offline, away from all screens and notifications. We need to intentionally build our emotional muscles, our nervous system regulation.
Engaging with difficult emotions, learning how to navigate conflict constructively, not just intellectually analyzing it, but feeling it and working through it viscerally, relationally.
Exactly. We need to set firm, conscious boundaries with technology. Using AI as a tool, a potentially powerful one, but not as a surrogate for human relationship or inner work. Stopping the outsourcing of feeling.
And maybe we need to actively reskill empathy. Teaching ourselves, teaching kids how to argue constructively, how to feel deeply, how to rupture relationships and then repair them. That messy, difficult repair process is where so much growth happens.
Absolutely. And crucially, we need to make space for the unknown, for mystery, for the things we can't easily explain or control or optimize. Practices that ground us back in our bodies, in sensation, in the present moment, rather than letting us float away entirely into the disembodied realm of software.
So, the stark warning here, the final mic drop for this layer. A post-soul world might be smooth, sleek, and sterile until the lights go out.
And then what have we got left?
Which brings us, finally, to our final layer. Layer 7, execution. We've mapped the territory, we've identified the risks and the potential pitfalls, so what the hell do we actually do now? What are some concrete, practical steps we can take, individually and maybe collectively?
Well, the first thing, maybe the simplest but hardest, is to maintain perspective. Recognize that technology, including AI, is a tool. A powerful tool, yes, but still a tool. And like any tool, it can be used skillfully for good or clumsily for ill or excessively to our detriment. We need to be conscious, deliberate choosers about how we integrate these tools into our lives.
Resisting that relentless Silicon Valley push to just outsource every single aspect of our emotional, social, and even spiritual well-being.
Precisely. It means actively choosing to build and nurture those real-world connections and rituals we just talked about. Make the time. Prioritize the face-to-face interactions, even when clicking a button feels easier or less awkward.
Practice the art of truly listening to another human being, trying to understand their world from the inside out, even when it's uncomfortable or challenges our own views.
Create pockets of silence and reflection in our daily lives. Push back against the constant noise and stimulation. We also need to educate ourselves, and crucially, future generations, about the potential downsides, the ethical complexities, the hidden costs of unchecked technological integration.
So teaching critical thinking skills, definitely, but also emotional literacy, right? Understanding our own feelings, understanding others, navigating relationships effectively, and emphasizing the irreplaceable value of deep human connection.
And on a systemic level, we need to demand more. Demand that technology be designed ethically with genuine human flourishing and well-being as the core priority, not just maximizing engagement minutes or ad revenue. That requires regulation, thoughtful design principles, maybe even new forms of digital citizenship.
So, summing up the stop doing list, stop worshiping convenience above all else, stop mindlessly romanticizing AI intimacy as a perfect substitute for the real thing. Stop forgetting the hidden long-term costs of constantly outsourcing our deepest feelings and experiences.
And the start doing list.
Yeah.
Start consciously making space for mystery, for awe, for the things that algorithms can't quantify. Start designing and demanding technology that actually supports our embodiment, our presence, our connection to the physical world, rather than constantly encouraging escape from it.
And start living like our souls, whatever they are or aren't, actually matter, even without definitive scientific proof.
Exactly. Which brings us to the final thought, the last mic drop to sit with. You don't need to prove the soul exists to protect it. You just have to live like it might.
This was The Thinking Stack, Episode 8. Are we living in a post-soul world?
And remember, we're not aiming for comfort here. We're aiming for maybe a deeper, clearer understanding.
Yeah. Share this deep dive with someone who's fascinated by AI, or maybe someone you know who's already finding real comfort in digital companionship. It might spark a really important, maybe difficult, but necessary conversation.
Next time on The Thinking Stack, we'll be diving into something equally mind-bending. Smart drugs or dumb choices? The truth about nootropics.
Get ready to have your brain thoroughly unpacked.
Stay sharp.
Stay human.
Stay awake.